What if I told you that King Charles has just slammed the door shut on his own son? And not just for today, not just for the short term, but forever. That's right. The monarch has made a declaration so firm, so final, that it has left the world reeling. No return, no reconciliation, no chance of Harry ever walking back into the fold of royal duties. Think about that for a second. After years of speculation, endless whispers of maybe one day, the possibility is gone. Completely. And the timing of this announcement? That's where the shock factor multiplies tenfold. Why now? Why so brutally final? Was it personal? Was it strategic? Or was it something darker, something buried beneath the polished floors of Buckingham Palace, something we're only just beginning to uncover? These are the questions exploding across headlines, dominating conversations in living rooms, and setting social media ablaze. Because this isn't just a family feud, it's a defining moment for the future of the monarchy itself. A father and a son, torn apart. A crown and a conscience, at war. And a global audience, watching it unfold with bated breath. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind for a moment. Imagine being Harry, born into unimaginable privilege, but always the spare. From the very beginning, his life was cast in a shadow. His brother's destiny cemented, his own uncertain. He was the cheeky royal, the mischievous prince, the soldier who dared to be human, relatable. For years, many believed he was the monarchy's secret weapon, the one who could modernize the institution with charm and authenticity. And yet, here we are, cast out, declared unwelcome, stripped not by decree of law, but by decree of trust. But let's pause, because this isn't simply a father tired of his son's rebellion. No, this is King Charles, head of state, protector of tradition, defender of the crown. Every word he utters carries the weight of centuries, the echoes of kings and queens who came before him. When Charles says Harry cannot return, it's not just family business. It's constitutional history being rewritten in real time. And the ripple effect? It doesn't just touch Harry and Meghan. It touches William. It touches the institution. It even touches you, watching from your screen right now, because what does it say about forgiveness, about family, about the cost of duty when blood no longer guarantees belonging? Consider this. The monarchy has always thrived on image, unity, continuity. Even when scandals raged, the palace maintained its unbreakable facade. But Harry's departure fractured that carefully maintained illusion. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the memoir, each was a hammer blow to the walls Charles tried desperately to keep standing. Every revelation about private conversations, every accusation of cruelty, every betrayal magnified under the world's spotlight. And now, Charles's announcement feels like the response of a king pushed to his breaking point. No more waiting for reconciliation. No more false hope. The line has been drawn. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Did Charles make this call as a king, or as a father? Which role outweighed the other when he stood before the cameras, or behind palace doors, to say what so many believed he never would? Because at its core, this isn't just a constitutional matter. It's heartbreak disguised as policy. A father rejecting a son. A king silencing a prince. Ask yourself, could you ever cut off your child in such a final, public way? And if you did, would it be strength or weakness? Now let's stir in the emotional contradictions. Charles has often spoken about his love for both his sons, even after Harry's repeated attacks. He smiled at coronation rehearsals, telling aides he hoped for unity. He once walked Meghan down the aisle when her own father couldn't be there. The narrative of Charles as a compassionate, if misunderstood, man runs deep. So why this? Why now? What changed? Was it something we don't know about? A betrayal we haven't yet seen splashed across tabloids? Or was it simply the culmination of every slight, every burn, every headline until forgiveness became impossible? Let's not forget the stakes. For Charles, the monarchy isn't just a crown and a title, it's survival. He knows he won't reign for as long as his mother. His legacy will be defined not by decades, but by the choices he makes right now. And in an era where public opinion can dismantle empires, keeping Harry on the periphery, forever dangling the question of return, was a risk Charles no longer wanted to take. The firm had to appear united, strong, above petty family drama. So in one stroke, Charles eliminated the variable. Harry is out. Permanently. No more questions. No more leaks. No more speculation. Finality, at least on paper. But is anything ever final in this family? Think about the ironies. Charles himself spent years as the outsider, vilified for his love of Camilla, struggling against public opinion that nearly tore him apart. He knows what it feels like to be cast out by perception, even if not by decree. So does this make him hypocritical? Or does it make him more ruthless, having learned firsthand that survival means sacrifice, even when the sacrifice is your own flesh and blood? And then there's the Meghan factor. Meghan. To some, she is the root of all this chaos. To others, she's the scapegoat. Either way, her shadow looms large over Charles's words. Was this announcement indirectly aimed at her as well? Was this the monarchy's way of declaring that Hollywood ambition and royal tradition cannot coexist? That Meghan's vision of service is universal would never again threaten the crown's carefully crafted motto of never complain, never explain. The undertones are undeniable. Now, let's push this deeper. If Harry cannot return, what does that mean for his children? Archie and Lilibet, royal by blood but distant by geography, born into privilege but raised outside the palace gates. Will they too inherit their father's exile? Or will Charles, grandfather before king, someday open the door for them even as it remains bolted shut for Harry? That's the generational cliffhanger unfolding before our eyes. The sins of the father, or the chance for redemption through the grandchildren. And here's where I want you, watching this, to reflect. Do you see Charles's decision as strength, a monarch prioritizing the crown over family drama? Or do you see it as cruelty, a father so wounded he sacrificed his own son for optics? Be honest, because how you see this doesn't just reveal your view of Charles or Harry. It reveals your view of family itself. Loyalty, forgiveness, legacy. Where would you draw the line? But the real sting? It's not just the announcement. It's the timing, the delivery, the subtext. Because Charles didn't just speak, he spoke now, at a moment when public faith in the monarchy wavers, when William's future looms larger, when every headline matters. This wasn't random. This was strategy. And strategy means planning. Which leads us to the most chilling question of all. What does Charles know that we don't? What pushed him to say the words that turned the dream of reconciliation into dust? Because what comes next isn't just another royal scandal. It's the unraveling of a family saga that stretches back centuries. And the next move? Well, that's where things get truly dangerous. When Charles's words hit the airwaves, it wasn't just another royal update. It was an earthquake. Imagine the scene. Reporters scrambling, social media timelines exploding, TV anchors cutting into regular programming with breaking banners. King Charles confirms Prince Harry will never return to royal duties. Just reading those words out loud feels heavy. Final. And in the world of royalty, where phrasing is carefully measured and double meanings often cloak the truth, the bluntness of this announcement was startling. There was no wiggle room, no polite, perhaps in the future. The door wasn't just closed. It was slammed shut, locked, bolted. Now pause with me and think about the weight of that sentence. For years, royal watchers, journalists, and fans alike have speculated about a possible reconciliation. Maybe at a funeral. Maybe at a jubilee. Maybe after emotions cooled. There was always that lingering what if. But Charles's announcement didn't leave space for what if. He stripped away the last traces of hope. And in doing so, he not only reshaped Harry's life, but also redefined what the monarchy is willing and unwilling to forgive. Let's dissect how the announcement was delivered, because in royal circles, tone is everything. Was it a palace press release? A carefully timed interview? A passing remark slipped into a speech that was otherwise routine? The presentation matters as much as the words themselves, because the monarchy doesn't just communicate, it performs. Every smile, every frown, every pause is scrutinized. And the way Charles confirmed Harry's permanent exile was no different. Witnesses said the delivery was measured, deliberate, heavy with the unmistakable weight of finality. He wasn't speaking as a father pleading with a lost son. He was speaking as a monarch drawing a line in history. And people noticed. The reactions came thick and fast. Newspapers called it a turning point. Some commentators framed it as Charles protecting the institution from Harry's unpredictability. Others painted it as cold, heartless, choosing the crown over blood. On social media, hashtags trended within minutes. Hashtag no way back. Hashtag goodbye Harry. Hashtag Charles draws the line. Divide was immediate. Half of Britain nodded in agreement, whispering that it was long overdue. The other half gasped, wondering how a father could declare such a thing about his own flesh and blood in front of the entire world. Think about it. We've seen royal rifts before, Prince Andrew's scandals, Diana's messy divorce, even the abdication of Edward VIII. But this felt different. Because Harry wasn't caught in scandal. He walked away, then spoke his truth, or at least his version of it. He exposed what he said were the cracks in the institution. He aired the family's secrets, painted them as cold, indifferent, trapped by duty. And now Charles has responded, not by calling for healing, but by doubling down. There is no return. A phrase that cuts like a knife, but also shields like armor. A paradox wrapped in a royal decree. But here's what makes this moment even more fascinating: the international stage. This wasn't just British news. CNN, NBC, Australian outlets, Canadian broadcasters, everyone was running with the story. In America, the narrative hit differently. To many, Harry and Meghan had become symbols of freedom, carving their own path. So Charles's decision was framed as punishment, a monarchy refusing to bend. In Britain, however, the tone shifted toward relief. Enough was enough. The king had finally spoken with clarity, something the public had been waiting for since Megxit. 2 continents, 2 interpretations, both boiling with emotion. Now, let's ask the question no one wants to ask out loud. Was this announcement really about Harry, or was it about William? Because in a monarchy, everything is about succession. Protecting the heir, strengthening the line, eliminating distractions. By declaring Harry permanently out, Charles effectively cleared the path for William and his children. No ambiguity. No chance of Harry swooping back in during moments of crisis. The public knows exactly where the line of duty stands. Could it be that this wasn't personal at all, but a strategic move to protect the monarchy's future? But then, what about the personal? Can a father ever truly separate the crown from the bloodline? This is where the contradictions get messy. Charles has long been portrayed as a man yearning for love, desperate to be understood. He spent decades fighting for his relationship with Camilla, enduring ridicule and judgment. He's spoken warmly about his grandchildren, even showing flashes of humor and tenderness in public. And yet, here he is, making a choice that seems devoid of compassion. Is this strength? Or is it the coldness his critics have accused him of for decades? Imagine Harry hearing the words. He's thousands of miles away, sitting in Montecito, perhaps surrounded by Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet. He's built a new life, one full of Hollywood glitz, charity projects, memoirs, documentaries. But deep down, the royal identity never disappears. And now, hearing his father say no return, the sting must cut deep. Not only because of what it means for him personally, but because of what it means symbolically. The prince who once served in Afghanistan, who walked behind his mother's coffin, who was the cheeky boy beloved by millions, officially written out of the royal future. This announcement also raises another pressing question. What happens if Harry wants to come back? Life is unpredictable. Public opinion shifts. Imagine a decade from now. What if Meghan chooses a different path? Or Harry himself grows weary of the Hollywood lifestyle? The door Charles just closed today could one day become the very symbol of regret. And in the monarchy, once something is declared, backtracking becomes nearly impossible. Will Charles regret this? Or has he safeguarded his crown by ensuring no wavering from the line of duty? Let's dig into how this echoes through history. Remember Edward VIII? He chose love over the crown, stepping down for Wallis Simpson. The royal family at the time considered it betrayal. He lived in exile, never truly forgiven. The parallels with Harry are chilling. A royal man, drawn to an American woman, leaving the institution for freedom and love. And now, just like Edward, Harry faces a lifetime of being outside looking in. The monarchy has drawn the same line it drew nearly a century ago. History, as it often does, repeats itself. And yet, there's a modern twist. Edward VIII didn't have social media, Netflix, or memoirs. Harry does. And this makes Charles's announcement more than just a royal decree. It's a warning. It's a chess move. By saying no return, Charles removes the dangling carrot Harry might have used in future projects. He makes it clear, Harry's story won't include a reconciliation arc, at least not on Charles's terms. But will Harry accept that? Or will he fight it with words, books, and cameras? That's where the tension truly begins to boil. Audience, let me ask you directly. Do you think Charles did the right thing? Was this the only way to protect the monarchy? Or has he just made the single biggest mistake of his reign, alienating not just Harry, but also the millions who sympathize with him? Your perspective matters, because the monarchy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It feeds on public perception. It thrives or dies based on the will of the people. And in a world where loyalty to the crown is no longer a given, Charles may have gambled everything. But here's the cliffhanger we can't ignore. Was this announcement really final? Or was it the opening shot in a larger battle that has yet to unfold? Because while Charles may have spoken with finality, the truth is far murkier. Behind palace walls, loyalties shift, plans change, and words spoken in certainty today can crumble under pressure tomorrow. What comes next could redefine not just Harry's future, but the monarchy's survival itself. The story of Prince Harry's exile didn't begin with King Charles's announcement. No, this was years in the making. An emotional slow burn that built up like a storm on the horizon, with warning signs everywhere, ignored until the lightning finally struck. To understand why Charles's words hit so hard, we have to rewind. We have to trace Harry's path from golden boy to global exile, from the mischievous spare to the man who now lives thousands of miles away, permanently cut off from the royal machine. And when you lay it all out, piece by piece, the picture becomes even more dramatic and far more heartbreaking. Let's start with the early years. Harry wasn't just born into the royal family. He was born into a role he never asked for. The spare. The one who mattered, but not in the same way his brother William did. Imagine that weight as a child. William was the future king. Harry was the backup plan. If William stumbled, Harry was there. If William thrived, Harry was always behind. Can you see the contradiction? Loved, but overshadowed. Important, but never essential. Even Diana herself once admitted she worried about Harry, about how his place in the hierarchy would affect his sense of self. And she was right to worry, because that seed of displacement grew into something much larger. Now, think about the trauma. Harry was just 12 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin, cameras flashing, the world watching. That moment, seared into the global consciousness, wasn't just a public tragedy, it was the defining wound of his life. And from that wound came both resilience and rebellion. Harry grew into a man who craved normality, who sought escape in the army, who tried to be one of the lads. But the press wouldn't leave him alone. His mistakes, partying in Vegas, dressing up in a Nazi uniform at a costume party, were amplified in a way few could survive. For Harry, life was always a paradox, adored by the public, but destroyed by the spotlight. Fast forward to his military years. This was Harry at his most grounded. He found purpose in Afghanistan, purpose in the camaraderie of soldiers who didn't care about titles. He was Captain Wales, not Prince Harry. For once, the shadow of the crown seemed to fade. But even there, the press hunted him. His deployments were cut short when leaks endangered his safety. Imagine that, trying to serve your country, only to be betrayed by headlines. It was another cut in the trust he had for the institution meant to protect him. And with every cut, the exile began to form, not in geography yet, but in spirit. Enter Meghan Markle. Here's where everything accelerated. Harry found love, passion, and perhaps most importantly, someone who saw him not as the spare, but as the man himself. For Harry, Meghan wasn't just a partner. She was salvation. But to the institution, to the press, to the monarchy, she was disruption. Meghan was American, biracial, outspoken, divorced, and independent. The very antithesis of the quiet, conforming royal consort. The romance was a fairy tale at first. Remember the glowing headlines, the wedding watched by billions, Charles walking Meghan down the aisle. For a moment, it seemed like Harry had brought something fresh, something modern, something hopeful to the family. But behind closed doors, the tension was building. And then came the turning point, Megxit. Do you remember the shock of that announcement? Harry and Meghan declaring they were stepping back as senior royals, seeking financial independence, splitting their time between the UK and North America. It was unprecedented. The Queen herself had to convene the so-called Sandringham Summit to deal with the fallout. For the monarchy, it was betrayal. For Harry, it was survival. He later described feeling trapped, even suggesting that his brother and father were trapped too, unable to escape the gilded cage. Those words cut deep, and the media went into overdrive. Suddenly, Harry wasn't the cheeky prince anymore. He was the runaway royal, abandoning duty for freedom. Now let's pause. Think about what exile really means. It isn't just leaving a country. It's being removed from the heart of where you once belonged. And Harry's exile wasn't geographical. It was emotional, institutional, symbolic. He could still visit Britain. He could still attend funerals, coronations, even the occasional public event. But his place in the royal machine? Gone. The titles remained. The bloodline remained. But the role? Vanished. For centuries, royals who walked away, whether by choice or by force, became shadows. And Harry, despite living under California's sunshine, became one of those shadows. The Oprah interview was the point of no return. Harry and Meghan sat there, calm but loaded, dropping bombshell after bombshell. Claims of racism. Allegations of neglect when Meghan said she felt suicidal. The suggestion that the firm had actively silenced and abandoned them. The world listened. Some were horrified. Others were skeptical. But one thing was certain. Harry had crossed a line that royals rarely dared cross. He broke the golden rule. Never complain, never explain. And once that line was crossed, the exile hardened. Because when you air the family's secrets to millions, the road back narrows until it disappears. And then came Spare. Harry's memoir wasn't just a book. It was a cannonball fired at the palace walls. Stories of fights with William, frozen silence from Charles, painful details about losing his virginity, about drugs, about therapy. It was raw, unfiltered, messy. And once again, the exile deepened. Because how can you reconcile when you've laid bare the ugliest truths, whether real, exaggerated, or misremembered, for the entire world to consume? Now let's tie this together. The long road to exile wasn't a straight line. It was a series of choices, of clashes, of betrayals real and perceived. Harry sought freedom. The monarchy sought survival. Meghan sought to redefine her role. The press sought drama. And in the middle of it all, the bonds that once held a family together disintegrated. By the time Charles made his announcement, the exile was already written in the stars. This was simply the stamp of finality, a signature on a document that had been drafted years earlier. But here's the question I'll leave you with tonight. Was exile inevitable? Or could it have been avoided if someone, Harry, Meghan, William, Charles, had made different choices at key moments? Was it destiny that Harry would follow the path of Edward VIII? Or was it the monarchy's failure to adapt that drove him away? Think about that, because the answer isn't simple. And what comes next may shock you even more, because this wasn't the first time the monarchy had to deal with a family member in exile. And history has a cruel way of repeating itself. Chapter 2 is complete. Do you want me to continue with Chapter 3, Echoes of Edward VIII, 2,000 words, next? Echoes. That's the word that haunts this chapter. Echoes of a scandal nearly a century old, echoing now in the saga of Prince Harry. Because if you think Harry's story is unique, think again. History has a cruel way of circling back, and the shadow of Edward VIII, yes, the king who gave up the throne for love, still lingers over Buckingham Palace. And make no mistake, the parallels are not just eerie. They're chilling. Let's rewind to 1936. The monarchy was rocked to its core when Edward VIII, then King of England, chose to abdicate rather than give up the woman he loved, Wallis Simpson. She, too, was American. She, too, was divorced. She, too, was branded a disruptor, an outsider who threatened the very foundations of the royal institution. Does that sound familiar? Meghan Markle may not be Wallis Simpson, but the comparisons practically write themselves. Two American women, two strong personalities, two royal men so smitten they were willing to risk everything. And in both cases, the monarchy responded the same way. Exile. Cold. Absolute. Final. But here's the twist. Edward was a king. Harry is just a prince. Edward gave up the throne itself, while Harry gave up duty and privilege. Yet the outcomes are astonishingly similar. Both men found themselves on the outside looking in, rejected by the very system that once defined them. And the tone of public outrage, the whispers in corridors of power, the tabloid frenzy. Identical, separated only by decades and technology. Now, let's dig into the human cost. Edward lived out his days abroad, stripped of influence, often ridiculed, his legacy forever tainted. He became a symbol of weakness, of indulgence, of betrayal. Will Harry follow the same fate? Or is Harry rewriting the script, using Netflix deals and best-selling memoirs to control his own narrative in a way Edward never could? That's the burning question. And yet, even as Harry speaks his truth, the monarchy's stance echoes the past. Distance, rejection, silence. History may repeat, but it also evolves. Consider the irony. King Charles knows this history better than anyone. He knows the monarchy barely survived the abdication crisis. He knows the damage Edward's choices inflicted on his mother, Queen Elizabeth, who unexpectedly became heir. And now, faced with Harry's rebellion, Charles is channeling the ghosts of his uncle's downfall. His announcement, that Harry will never return, feels less like a personal vendetta and more like a calculated move to prevent another abdication-style scandal. But ask yourself, is Charles protecting the crown, or is he simply terrified of history repeating itself? And here's where things get even darker. Edward VIII spent much of his exile resenting his family, bitter at being cast out. He was given a title, but not a role. A presence, but not a purpose. Sound familiar? Harry holds the title of Duke, but no duties. A prince, but without a kingdom. He, too, risks becoming defined by bitterness, by absence, by what might have been. That's the cruel fate of royals in exile. They're too important to be forgotten, but too controversial to be embraced. Audience, let me ask you directly. Do you believe Harry will go down in history as another Edward VIII, remembered for abandoning his role for love? Or is this story different because Harry is fighting back, carving a new identity outside the monarchy? Think carefully, because how you answer reveals not just your view of Harry, but your view of the monarchy itself. Should it bend, adapt, forgive, or should it remain unyielding, even at the cost of family ties? And here's the cliffhanger. Edward's exile didn't just end his reign. It reshaped the monarchy for decades, putting Elizabeth II on the throne and changing the course of history. Could Harry's exile do the same? Could Charles's rejection of his son set off a chain reaction that will alter William's reign, or even the monarchy's survival in a modern world? Because what comes next isn't just about the past repeating. It's about whether the crown itself can survive the weight of its own history. The war of words. That's what defined the next stage of Harry's exile. And it wasn't fought in palaces, but in interviews, documentaries, podcasts, and memoirs. If Edward VIII's exile was quiet, almost pitiful, Harry's was explosive, noisy, global. And make no mistake, this wasn't just a battle for sympathy. It was a battle for narrative. A fight over who gets to tell the story of the royal family. The monarchy itself, with its carefully polished statements, or Harry and Meghan, with their raw and often shocking revelations. Let's begin with the Oprah interview. Do you remember where you were when you first heard it? The clips played everywhere. The headlines screamed across newspapers. Racism, neglect, silencing. Meghan spoke of suicidal thoughts, of being denied help. Harry admitted he felt trapped in the royal system, suggesting William and Charles were trapped too. These were not casual remarks. They were bombs lobbed across the Atlantic, landing squarely at Buckingham Palace's doorstep. And the palace's response? A cold, brief statement. Some recollections may vary. That phrase became iconic, for words loaded with centuries of institutional defensiveness. But Harry and Meghan weren't finished. They signed deals with Netflix and Spotify, determined to amplify their voice. The Netflix docuseries painted the monarchy as archaic, cold, even cruel. Cameras captured intimate moments, private footage, and tearful confessions. The message was clear. The Sussexes were rewriting the royal narrative, and they were doing it on their own terms. For the monarchy, this was sacrilege. Royals had always followed the motto, never complain, never explain. Harry and Meghan obliterated it. Then came Spare. Harry's memoir wasn't just a book, it was a declaration of war. Every page seemed designed to sting. Stories of William physically attacking him, of Charles pleading for peace but showing little warmth, of Camilla maneuvering her way into the public's good graces at Harry's expense. Even intimate details about losing his virginity and experimenting with drugs became global talking points. For critics, it was oversharing of the worst kind. For Harry, it was truth-telling, a way of seizing back power from an institution that had controlled his story since birth. And here's where the contradiction deepens. Harry claimed he wanted reconciliation, that he still loved his family. Yet with every word, every interview, every documentary, he widened the gulf. The monarchy, for its part, maintained silence, hoping the storm would pass. But silence has a cost. By refusing to engage, the palace allowed Harry's version of events to dominate. And so the war of words became one-sided in the public eye, Harry firing round after round, the monarchy absorbing the blows without striking back. Audience, let me ask you, do you think this was bravery on Harry's part, finally speaking his truth? Or was it betrayal, dragging his family through the mud for personal gain? This is the heart of the conflict, because your answer reveals whether you see Harry as a victim or a villain. And therein lies the brilliance and the danger of this war of words. It forces people to choose sides. But here's the irony. For all the noise Harry created, the monarchy still held the upper hand. Why? Because of silence. In a world saturated with confession, mystery becomes power. Charles and William didn't have to respond. Their very refusal became a strategy. People could doubt Harry's accounts precisely because the palace never confirmed them. Recollections may vary became not just a phrase but a shield. Still, the damage was undeniable. Polls showed a sharp decline in Harry and Meghan's popularity, especially in the UK. Once the Golden Prince, Harry was now often viewed with suspicion, his motives questioned. Was he speaking out for justice or for profit? The Netflix deal, the book sales, the Spotify projects, all fed into the perception that Harry had monetized his trauma. And for Charles, this was unforgivable, not just because it hurt the monarchy's reputation, but because it felt like betrayal by his own son. Now think about this. Words have consequences. Every page of Spare, every clip from Oprah, every scene from Netflix widened the gap. And while Harry might have hoped the words would liberate him, they became chains, binding him further into exile. Because how can you walk back into a family you've publicly accused of cruelty? How can Charles ever invite Harry back to the inner circle without appearing weak? The war of words didn't just damage trust. It annihilated the possibility of quiet reconciliation. And here's the cliffhanger. Harry may have thought he was winning by telling his side of the story. But behind palace walls, Charles and William were planning their own move. A move not made with words, but with silence, strategy, and eventually, one single announcement that shattered every lingering dream of return. Behind palace walls, where whispers echo louder than shouts and decisions carry the weight of centuries, King Charles's breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was a slow accumulation of slights, betrayals, and humiliations that built up until the dam finally burst. To understand why Charles said those words that would forever bar Harry from returning, you have to step into the shadows of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House. Picture the hushed corridors, the staffers moving carefully, the constant balancing act of monarchy and family. Because in those hidden rooms, the tension between father and son had reached boiling point long before the world heard the final verdict. Let's begin with Charles himself. He waited decades, literally decades, for the crown. A lifetime in the shadows of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, watching, learning, sometimes resenting. His reign was never going to be as long as hers. He knew it. He knows his time is limited, that every year, every decision, will define his legacy. And yet, in those critical first years as king, what dominated the headlines? Not his policies, not his causes, not his vision, but Harry. Always Harry. The runaway son, the interviews, the accusations, the memoir. Instead of Charles being celebrated for finally stepping into his destiny, he was constantly on the defensive, his own child dragging him through the mud. That stung, that humiliated, and most of all, that infuriated him. Inside the palace, aides often spoke of Charles's frustration. Imagine the daily briefings, red boxes piled high, state matters pressing, yet every morning there's another Harry headline splashed across the tabloids. Another explosive clip. Another damaging revelation. How long could any monarch tolerate that? How long could any father bear the disloyalty? And here lies the duality of Charles's breaking point. It wasn't just personal heartbreak. It was political sabotage. Harry wasn't simply a son lashing out. He was a global figure undermining the crown itself. But what was the tipping point? Many point to spare. The memoir that didn't just bruise Charles's reputation. It shredded it. Harry accused him of emotional distance, of failing him as a father, of prioritizing image over love. For Charles, who has spent decades battling the perception that he's cold and unfeeling, those accusations were poison. He had worked tirelessly to rehabilitate his image, especially after the Diana years. And in one book, his own son resurrected the ghosts he thought he had buried. The late-night phone calls from aides, the fury of headlines, the mockery on talk shows. It was relentless. And Charles, proud yet sensitive, felt cornered. Then there were the leaks. Inside sources whispered that Charles and William believed Harry had broken every code of trust. Private conversations appeared in interviews. Palace dealings made their way into books. Whether Harry himself was the source or whether it was Meghan or their circle, it didn't matter. The perception inside Buckingham Palace was simple. Harry could not be trusted. Imagine that realization for a father, believing your son might expose you at any moment. How do you lead a monarchy under those conditions? That paranoia, justified or not, became unbearable. Now add the Meghan factor. While Charles once seemed warm toward her, walking her down the aisle, speaking of affection, behind closed doors, insiders say frustration boiled. Her ambition, her refusal to conform, her willingness to challenge the system. It was everything the monarchy feared. And Charles began to see Harry not as a son who strayed, but as a man under the influence of someone pulling him further and further away. That perception, whether true or not, turned irritation into resentment. Because Charles wasn't just losing Harry. He believed he was losing Harry to Meghan. But perhaps the greatest pressure came not from Meghan, nor the media, nor Harry's own words. It came from William. William, the heir, the future. The one who will carry the monarchy into the 21st century. Behind palace walls, William reportedly pushed his father to act decisively. For William, the stakes were even higher. His reign could be decades long, and he could not afford Harry's constant drama overshadowing him. It's whispered that William saw Harry as a threat to stability, a destabilizing force that had to be neutralized once and for all. And when William spoke with conviction, Charles listened. So, piece by piece, the pressure mounted. A lifetime of waiting to be king. A son who publicly branded him a cold father. A monarchy under siege from Netflix, Spotify, and Oprah. A trusted heir demanding clarity. It all built until Charles realized the cost of inaction was greater than the cost of brutality. And so he chose finality. He chose to close the door, not gently, but with force. Now, let's step into Charles's mind in that moment. Was he thinking as a father, anguished over a lost son? Or was he thinking as a king, protecting the monarchy at any cost? Or was it both, a tormenting fusion of love and duty, forcing him into a decision he never wanted to make? That is the paradox of his breaking point. Heartbreak disguised as strategy. Audience, let me put this question directly to you. If you were in Charles's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have kept the door open, hoping for reconciliation, risking constant betrayal? Or would you, too, have slammed it shut, prioritizing the crown over blood? There's no easy answer. But whichever side you fall on, remember this. Charles's choice wasn't made in one day. It was forged in the fire of betrayal, humiliation, and fear. And here's the cliffhanger that sets the stage for what comes next. Charles may have announced Harry's permanent exile, but the real betrayal, the one that truly cut deepest, was still to come. The betrayal that Charles could never forgive, the act that locked the door forever. And that betrayal? Well, it came not from Meghan, not from William, but from Harry himself. Betrayal. That's the word that hangs heavy over the next chapter. The betrayal that couldn't be forgiven. Because for King Charles, there wasn't just one incident that broke trust with Harry. It was a series of choices, revelations, and leaks that piled up until the relationship fractured beyond repair. But there was one moment, one act, that insiders whisper was the point of no return. And once it happened, Charles knew there was no way back. Let's start by asking, What does betrayal even mean in the context of a royal family? This isn't just forgetting a birthday or saying something careless. In a monarchy, betrayal means exposing secrets, challenging authority, undermining the crown. It means breaking an unwritten code that has held the family together for centuries. Keep disputes private, protect the institution, never air dirty laundry. Harry didn't just break that code. He obliterated it. Think back to Spare. The memoir wasn't just personal, it was explosive. Harry didn't shy away from details. He described his father as emotionally distant, incapable of giving the warmth he craved. He painted William as aggressive, even violent during one confrontation. He criticized Camilla, suggesting she had leaked stories to the press to boost her own image. For Charles, reading those pages, or being briefed on them before publication, must have felt like a knife in the back. Not because Harry was just venting, but because he was selling those private moments to the world. Once something like that is written, it cannot be undone. The damage is permanent. Now, betrayal isn't just about words. It's about trust. And trust between father and son was already fragile. When Harry revealed private conversations with Charles, texts, phone calls, details of their strained relationship, it crossed a line. Think about it. If you were a father, would you ever feel safe confiding in a son who might publish your words for millions to dissect? That's the betrayal Charles could not forgive. Because it wasn't just personal. It was institutional. It meant that the monarch of the United Kingdom could no longer trust his own son not to leak, twist, or monetize his words. But was Spare the only betrayal? Insiders suggest there was more. Remember the Oprah interview, when Harry and Meghan spoke of racism within the royal family, but refused to name names. The palace reeled. Who was being accused? Was it Charles? Was it William? The ambiguity left the monarchy tarnished, fueling speculation that refused to die. Charles, already sensitive to public perception, felt cornered. The monarchy thrives on clarity, on control of narrative. That interview shattered it. And for Charles, allowing such accusations to hang over the family was unforgivable. Then came the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, a moment that should have united the family, steeped in tradition and mourning. Yet even there, the tension was visible. Harry was separated from his family in the procession, kept at arm's length. Reports swirled of icy exchanges, of brief conversations that went nowhere. To the public, it looked like grief. To Charles, it felt like confirmation. Harry had chosen a path so far removed that even in mourning, unity was impossible. Let's not forget the press leaks. Time and again, stories emerged from sources close to Harry and Meghan, about Charles, about Camilla, about William. Were they directly involved? Perhaps, perhaps not. But the perception was enough. Palace insiders believed Harry had broken the family code. And in a family where perception is reality, that was the ultimate betrayal. Now, imagine Charles's position. He has dedicated his life to service, waited decades for the crown, endured ridicule, humiliation, scandal. At last, he wears the crown, but his reign is overshadowed by his son's constant criticism. A son he once cradled as a child. A son he walked beside after Diana's death. A son he had defended, forgiven, loved. And now that son had turned into the loudest critic of the institution Charles swore to uphold. For Charles, it wasn't just betrayal. It was treason of the heart. But here's the cruel irony. Harry may not have intended it as betrayal. From his perspective, he was telling his truth, seeking healing, exposing what he saw as injustice. He may have believed honesty could lead to change, even reconciliation. Yet for Charles, every word was a dagger. Every revelation deepened the wound. And so, two men who once shared blood and bond found themselves on opposite sides of a chasm too wide to bridge. Audience, let me ask you, where do you stand? Do you see Harry's revelations as courageous truth-telling, or as disloyal betrayal? Would you forgive your child for speaking out, or would you, like Charles, see it as the ultimate breaking of trust? It's not an easy question, but it's the very question at the heart of this royal tragedy. And here's where the cliffhanger lies. Charles's anger didn't just end in words. It hardened into policy, into finality, into a decision that stunned the world. Because after betrayal comes consequence. And the consequence was exile, not just physical, but permanent. A prince cast out, a father who would not forgive. But what role did Meghan play in this fallout? Was she the spark that ignited the fire? or simply the scapegoat for a feud that was already destined to explode. Every royal scandal has its lightning rod. For Charles and Harry, that lightning rod was Meghan Markle. Whether fairly or unfairly, her shadow looms over every conversation, every whisper in palace corridors, every headline that screams betrayal and exile. Meghan wasn't just Harry's wife, she became a symbol. To some, she represented progress, a biracial American actress marrying into one of the oldest, most rigid institutions in the world. To others, she represented disruption, a woman who refused to bow to tradition, who demanded her voice be heard in a family built on silence. And for King Charles, Meghan became inescapable, whether he blamed her or not. Her influence was always at the heart of Harry's choices. Let's rewind to the beginning. Meghan's entry into the royal family was, at first, a fairy tale. The public adored the story, a Hollywood star and a prince in love. The wedding was hailed as a new dawn, filled with symbols of modernity and diversity. Charles himself walked Meghan down the aisle when her father was absent, a gesture many saw as welcoming, even touching. In that moment, it seemed the monarchy had embraced her. It seemed Charles had gained a daughter. But as we now know, the glow faded quickly. The British press, relentless as ever, began to dissect Meghan's every move. Her clothes, her spending, her relationships with staff, all came under fire. Stories of tension with Kate Middleton surfaced, painting Meghan as demanding, even difficult. And whether those stories were exaggerated or not, they fed into a perception that Meghan didn't fit the mold. For the monarchy, perception is everything. Meghan's refusal to remain silent, her willingness to challenge the narrative, made her dangerous in a way few royal spouses had ever been. Here's where Charles's perspective comes in. As king, he values stability. As father, he wants peace. But Meghan's presence seemed to bring the opposite. Harry, once cheeky but loyal, began to drift further and further from the palace line after meeting her. Was that coincidence? Or was it cause and effect? Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. She has too much influence. She's driving him away. Harry's not himself anymore. Whether true or not, those whispers hardened into belief. For Charles, Meghan wasn't just a daughter-in-law. She was the catalyst of disruption. But let's challenge that narrative for a moment. Was Meghan really the cause, or was she simply the match that lit a fire already smoldering inside Harry? Remember, Harry's resentment toward the institution existed long before Meghan. His mistrust of the press, his grief over Diana, his discomfort with being the spare, all of it predated their relationship. Meghan may have given him the courage to act, but the desire for freedom was already there. And yet, in the court of public opinion, and perhaps in Charles's own mind, Meghan became the symbol of Harry's rebellion. Now, think about how this shadow played into Charles's breaking point. Every time Harry spoke out, Meghan's name was attached. The Oprah interview, Meghan's revelations of suicidal thoughts, of racism. The Netflix series, Meghan's candid tears, her direct criticisms of the firm. Even Spare, though Harry's voice dominated, Meghan was present in every chapter as the silent co-architect of his choices. For Charles, who values loyalty above all, it must have felt as if Meghan was constantly there, challenging him, questioning the institution he dedicated his life to protect. And let's not ignore the irony. Charles himself once fought for love against the institution. His decades-long struggle to be with Camilla, his reputation tarnished by it, his image as the villain in Diana's story, it all echoes Harry's battle. But here's the contradiction. Instead of empathizing with his son, Charles may have projected his own scars onto Meghan. He knew how dangerous an outsider could appear. He knew how much damage love outside the rules could do. And so, rather than compassion, Charles responded with suspicion. Audience, here's a question for you. Was Meghan truly the villain of this story, or was she the scapegoat? Did Charles and the palace blame her to avoid admitting that Harry's rebellion came from within, not from without? It's a question that cuts to the heart of this saga, because how you answer defines whether you see Meghan as manipulator or liberator. But no matter where you stand, one truth remains. Meghan's shadow was always there. In the eyes of the public, in the whispers of the palace, in the decision Charles eventually made. Her influence, real or imagined, meant reconciliation was never just about Harry and Charles. It was about Meghan too. And for the monarchy, That was a complication too great to bear. Here's where the cliffhanger twists. While Meghan's presence may have fueled Charles's resolve, the real shock came not from her influence, but from the world's reaction to Charles's decision. Because outside the palace gates, beyond the whispers of courtiers, the public had their own say. And when Charles slammed the door shut, the people, both in Britain and abroad, exploded with cheers, fury, and disbelief. The battle over Harry's fate wasn't just royal anymore. It was public, and that battle would be louder than any palace whisper. The announcement landed like a thunderclap, and almost instantly, the world reacted. The palace may have chosen silence for years. The monarchy may have tried to project dignity and distance. But the moment Charles made his declaration about Harry, that he would never return as a working royal, the story was no longer theirs to control. It belonged to the public. And the public responded with cheers, tears, and fury, dividing into camps as passionate as they were loud. Let's start in Britain, the monarchy's home turf. The UK tabloids exploded. The Daily Mail plastered headlines of triumph. King draws the line, no return for Harry. For many readers, this was justice. They had watched Harry and Meghan walk away, sign multi-million-dollar deals, criticize the family from California, and yet still hover on the edges of royal life. For them, Charles's words were a relief. No more ambiguity. No more wondering if Harry would swoop back into the fold at the next jubilee or state occasion. One poll showed that a majority of Britons agreed with Charles's decision, some even calling it long overdue. To them, the monarchy wasn't a halfway house. You were either in or you were out. But not everyone in Britain celebrated. For another segment of the population, the announcement was cruel, cold, unforgiving. They remembered Harry as Diana's boy, the grieving 12-year-old walking behind his mother's coffin. They remembered him as the cheeky soldier who fought in Afghanistan. For them, Harry wasn't just a royal. He was a son, a brother, a human being. And for Charles to publicly slam the door shut on him felt like betrayal of a different kind, a father abandoning his child. Letters poured into newspapers, opinion columns cried out about the monarchy's lack of compassion, and questions were raised. What kind of family turns its back on one of its own? Crossed the Atlantic, and the response was even more polarized. In America, where Harry and Meghan had built their new life, Charles's announcement was framed as punishment. The New York Times ran a piece questioning whether the monarchy could adapt in the modern age. Talk shows debated whether Charles was being a responsible king or a heartless father. Social media lit up with hashtags like #StandWithHarry and #DownWithTheMonarchy, with Americans rallying around the couple they saw as victims of an archaic system. For them, Harry and Meghan symbolized freedom, individuality, the courage to walk away from a toxic institution. And Charles's decision only reinforced that narrative. The monarchy is cold, rigid, unforgiving. Meanwhile, in Commonwealth countries, the announcement stirred its own firestorm. In places like Australia and Canada, where debates about breaking away from the crown were already simmering, Charles's words became political fuel. Critics of the monarchy pointed to the treatment of Harry as proof that the crown was outdated, heartless, and irrelevant. If they can't show compassion within their own family, one commentator asked, how can they represent ours? In Jamaica, where Republican movements are gaining momentum, the announcement was seized upon as yet another reason to sever ties with the British monarchy altogether. And then, of course, there was social media. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, it became a battlefield. Memes spread like wildfire, some mocking Harry as the prince who wanted the cake and ate it too. Others portraying Charles as a villain out of a Shakespearean tragedy. One viral post showed a photo of young Harry with Diana, captioned, "She would never have slammed the door." Another trended with the phrase, "No way back," but was there ever a way in? Opinions were divided, passionate, and unforgiving. Now let's focus on the irony. Charles had made his announcement to create clarity, to close the chapter, to silence speculation. But instead of silence, he ignited noise louder than ever. The very act of shutting the door only amplified the debate. People weren't just asking about Harry's future anymore. They were asking about the monarchy's future. Was this the compassionless rigidity that would define Charles's reign? Or was it the necessary strength that would save it? And this brings us to the deeper emotional layer. For ordinary people, this wasn't just a royal story. It was a family story. How many viewers at home saw their own fractured families reflected in Charles and Harry's divide? The father estranged from his son. The brother turned rival. The in-laws despised. This wasn't just monarchy. It was universal heartbreak. That's why it stung so deeply. Because while most of us don't live in palaces, the pain of family betrayal is something almost everyone understands. Audience, let me ask you directly. If your child betrayed you, humiliated you, sold your secrets to the world, would you forgive them? Or would you, like Charles, cut them off for good? And if you were Harry, would you see Charles as a father protecting his crown, or as a man abandoning his son in the name of duty? But here's the cliffhanger you can't ignore. While the public screamed, argued, and took sides, one voice mattered more than all the rest. The voice of William. Because behind closed doors, whispers suggest that Charles's decision wasn't his alone, that William's influence, the heir to the throne, tipped the balance. Which raises the question, did Charles slam the door shut on Harry as a father, or as a king preparing the way for his firstborn? William, the heir, the future king, the steady hand the monarchy is counting on to lead it into the next century. When King Charles made his shocking announcement about Harry, the world heard the words from his lips, but behind those words was another figure, Prince William. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just Charles's decision. William's role in shaping, pressuring, and ultimately forcing clarity was critical. If Charles was the one who shut the door, William was the one who made sure it was bolted. Let's begin with the obvious. William and Harry were once inseparable. The Diana boys. The brothers who leaned on each other through tragedy, walking behind their mother's coffin, shouldering the weight of grief in front of the entire world. They shared jokes, cheeky glances, and a bond forged in pain. For years, they were each other's greatest ally, facing the press together, navigating royal duty side by side. But that bond has been shattered. And when Charles declared Harry would never return, many saw William's fingerprints all over it. Why? Because William has more at stake than anyone else. This isn't just about family for him. It's about the survival of his future reign. Every scandal, every betrayal, every headline about Harry reflects on the monarchy that William will one day inherit. Imagine being in his shoes, watching your brother torch the institution you've sworn to protect, accusing your wife of cruelty, painting your father as cold. For William, Harry's rebellion wasn't just personal, it was existential. And that meant action. Reports suggest William has been the most uncompromising voice in private discussions. While Charles wrestled with the dual role of king and father, William cut through the emotion. He urged his father to be firm, to stop waiting for reconciliation, to put the crown first. Sources whisper that William told Charles in no uncertain terms, "It's him or the monarchy." And for a king whose legacy depends on leaving the crown strong for his heir, those words mattered. Now, think about the tension that creates. A father torn between love for his son and duty to his crown, and a firstborn demanding strength to secure the monarchy's future. It's Shakespearean. Charles may have spoken the words, but William supplied the steel. And in doing so, the rift between brothers widened into a chasm. Let's not forget the personal side. William and Harry's feud isn't abstract, it's raw. Harry's memoir, Spare, portrayed William as a bully, even recounting a physical fight. He accused William of mistreating Meghan, of siding with the institution over family. For William, these weren't just words. They were attacks on his character, his marriage, his future queen. How could William forgive that? How could he ever risk welcoming Harry back into the fold, knowing the next leak or betrayal might destroy him? His stance hardened. His patience evaporated. And then there's Kate. We can't ignore her role in this dynamic. Meghan versus Kate became the media's favorite storyline, and while much of it was exaggerated, tensions did exist. Harry himself described Kate as cold, as complicit in Meghan's isolation. For William, who has always been protective of his wife, these attacks were unforgivable. Family loyalty demanded action. If Charles wavered, William pushed. And when William pushes, he does so with the authority of a future king. But here's where the story turns from personal to political. William isn't just Charles's son, he is the monarchy's next act. Courtiers, advisors, and even Commonwealth leaders see him as the future. His voice carries enormous weight. When he urged Charles to act, It wasn't just a son giving advice. It was the heir directing the monarch. It was the future dictating the present. And Charles, knowing his reign will be shorter, listened. Because ultimately, everything he does now is about leaving the crown intact for William. Audience, let me put this to you. Do you think William acted out of loyalty to the monarchy or out of anger at his brother? Was it cold strategy or personal vengeance wrapped in duty? That's the dilemma, because the answer could be both. And if it is both, then the decision was inevitable. But here's the irony. By pushing so hard, William may have saved the monarchy in the short term, but destroyed any chance of repairing his brotherly bond in the long term. Because for Harry, the announcement wasn't just his father's rejection. It was his brother's triumph. The heir had spoken. The spare had been silenced. And that dynamic, so deeply rooted in history, now defines their future. And so we end on this cliffhanger. William may believe he has secured the monarchy, but in doing so, has he also set up a legacy of bitterness that will haunt his reign? Because the story of Harry's exile isn't just about Charles. It's about the heir who demanded it, and the brother who will never forgive him. Irony cuts sharper than any sword, and nowhere is that irony more biting than in the phrase, "Service is universal." Those 3 words, uttered by Harry and Meghan in their parting statement after stepping down as senior royals, now echo against the backdrop of King Charles's declaration that Harry will never return to royal duties.